This is Dave Moss of the Unfunded List, and I'm pleased to bring you the Open Door Philanthropy podcast. I hope you enjoy it.
All aboard and join us for Open Door Philanthropy.
Today's the first ever nautical episode, as I've been invited by my good friend Steve Wozencraft aboard his yacht, known as the Waterford. I head down to the docks to interview Steve, and I think back on all the years I've known him, and all the cool things we've done together in the world of philanthropy. I first met Steve at the State Department during a tour for young philanthropists, where Steve was our volunteer guide. We later worked together on the organizing committee of the first ever Nexus Global Youth Summit. And then after that, I went to go work at an organization called Atlas Corps as their first ever partnerships manager. Steve joined their board of directors. We had many fundraising and outreach events on board the Waterford during those years. I've since left the organization, but I've stayed in touch with Steve. And I just found out that he's recently been named chairman of the board of directors of Atlas Corps. Look forward to talking to him about that. In addition to running Atlas Corps' board, he's involved with the John D. Evans Foundation, named for his partner, C-SPAN founder John Evans. That foundation supports social justice work, LGBT causes, AIDS vaccine research, environmental protection, technological innovation, education, and the arts. I'm very excited to be back on board the Waterford. It's a lovely boat, and to catch up with Steve. But before I do, let's Google his name, learn a little bit more about him. Steve Wozencraft is Executive Vice President of the John D. Evans Foundation and has spent the last 30 years of his career working to extend value, opportunity, and spread justice and love around the world. He is a frequent contributor for the Huffington Post and other news sites, as well as a convener of policymakers and thinkers regarding what social justice is and can become. Stephen is the former president of the John O'Donnell Company, a New York financial development firm established in 1966. That company specialized in helping NGOs and not-for-profit organizations. As president of the John O'Donnell Company, he oversaw the development of organizations, helping them build capacity and raise over $1 billion collectively. He has served on the boards of organizations around the globe and has assisted causes like the Boys Club of New York, Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens, the William Jefferson Clinton Presidential Foundation, CGI, the Harlem Boys Choir, the Jewish Board of Family and Children Services, Empire State Pride Agenda, Kids Peace, and numerous others. Steve's bio actually goes on and on quite a bit further than that, but I think we'd rather get to the interview. You get the idea, though. Steve has worked with some of the most powerful people in the world and advanced some of the most important causes of the past few decades. He's a great guy, and so without further ado, let's dive more deeply into his life and work. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Okay, hello, Steve. Thanks very much for inviting me on board the Waterford. Let's get right into it. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
That's a really big question. I grew up in San Diego. I was a child of somebody who was in the Navy, so we moved around a lot. And as a grade school student, probably didn't spend more than a year in any one grade school. It was a quite diverse upbringing.
Yeah, interesting. Where was your? So you every year you moved?
Yes.
Where was your favorite place? Or was it? Or do you not have a favorite place when you like that? I mean, I lived in just the same place my entire time, so it's hard for me to think about.
I don't think I really did have a favorite place. It was just, constant adapting.
And how do you do that?
As a child,
yeah,
it's difficult. For me, I like to say that that's one of the biggest educations I ever had was learning how to go into a room of strangers and adapt very quickly.
Yeah,
and I think that's really how I've gotten to where I am today.
I've seen you go into a group of strangers and adapt very quickly. So yeah, that makes sense. Do you, as a child, do you remember giving or philanthropy type activities or giving back?
Yes, I mean I was raised in the church, the LDS church. So that church has a very long history of philanthropy and taking care of its own. helping those who are in need. So I think that was one of the big things that helped me sort of move the trajectory of my life towards that.
They're tithing? Is that...
Tithing, yes. I remember my tithing settlement meetings where you had to bring in your W-2 and...
Really?
And the church would, at the end of the year, you would take your W-2 and they would look at it and say, well, you didn't give your 10%, so you need to up it a little. And then the church got sued, I believe, and they can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But,
well, that's very interesting. So did the 10% have to go to the church?
Yes.
Or were they... Okay.
Yeah, so it was called tithing settlement. So you settled your account, basically, if you didn't pay your full 10%.
So, but you could go in there and you could have 10% of donations to things that aren't the church. They would still want...
This was for the church.
Yeah. But then they... what do they do with it?
Well, the church has a very vast organization called Desiree Industries. So they own fishing canneries, they own orange groves, they own chicken farms.
Sure.
They are the largest landholder in upstate Florida. They're building, 500,000 acres of community up there. So the church is a very vast organization. It's not just a religious organization; it's an industry.
Yeah, very interesting. Do they support other causes, groups, nonprofits? Do they make grants?
I don't think so. As a child growing up in somewhat poverty, the church was very helpful for us. They did everything from give us money to clothes to food. Desiree Industries has its own brand of food, or at least at the time it did. I don't know if it still does. I haven't been a member for a while. But they're very helpful for the people in the church, and I think they help within communities that they also live in. Mormons are really good about helping others, but they're also really good about judging others.
So you received services from... They gave you food and such?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. That must have contributed to who you are, right? Does that make you want to give back?
I think so, yeah. I think, that whole thing of seeing a community come together around someone, and also there was an expectation that you were going to, no matter if you were wealthy or poor, that you were still going to contribute. So I worked at the fish cannery. I, did things for Desiree Industries and for the church that were helpful. And that was just part of the culture.
Mm-hmm. I grew up in Waterville, Maine, in a wealthy family, but Waterville's a very poor town. And one of the things I like to say is you can have all the money in the world to live in Waterville, and it really doesn't make that much of a difference because what are you gonna buy? Lots of my friends were they were relying on food stamps and other services of that sort. And even though it wasn't really a part of my life, it did seem like it was a part of my community's existence, and it's very important for me. Some of my friends that didn't have that have a very hard time understanding they understand philanthropy, but certain aspects, like particularly social service stuff, or like that a family might need canned food to eat. These things are maybe intellectually understood, but not, I think, really understood. So thanks for telling me about that. I think I've always, you're a very grounded person. I think that's probably part of it. And it would be very easy to, living on a fancy yacht, to not be grounded, literally and also spiritually.
Well, the fancy yacht is just a thing, right? Wealth manifests itself in many different ways, and we're only stewards. The yacht will be here long after I'm dead. So it's a great way to get around, and it's a lovely place to be, and certainly part of our philanthropy is doing events on the yacht for the organizations that we support. And it does sort of disarm people sometimes so that they are more open to discussion and looking at the philanthropic aspect of what we're doing.
Other than the church, were there other people that sort of taught you what philanthropy was and giving in front of your parents?
Absolutely. In a very real way, my first life partner in New York, who I had a long-term relationship with, owned the John O'Donnell Company. His name was John O'Donnell. And he had built a business in the 60s around helping nonprofits raise money. And that was his business, and he was extremely successful at
In the
it.
60s.
Yes.
Is that would that have been a pretty new thing in the 60s?
It
Now
was.
that's quite common.
He was a pioneer. He was the first, probably.
Really?
The firm was started in 1966, and he was a wonderful writer, could write really well, and built this business over the years to be the largest. There was, at the time, we had the largest repository of foundation information of any other organization, and this is pre sort of computer technology. So a lot of the organizations that the firm worked for were global. There were offices all over the world, and it did some really good work.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Is there anything about yourself? So that we've talked a little bit now about your influences. Is there anything about you now that is different from your influences? Just to explain, I learned philanthropy from my grandmother, who, mostly because she was a Jew who made it through World War II, was mostly focused on supporting Jewish studies causes at institutions and also Holocaust memorials. Up the road is the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. She has her name on the donor wall and also on the list of survivors.
Right.
I find that stuff very important, but I don't think I would make a gift to a Holocaust center. I support other things. Are there things about that you have found for yourself that you support? That
Sure, I'm fortunate enough to be able to support a lot of different things. My philosophy of philanthropy wasn't taught to me. It was just sort of something that evolved as I grew.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I have my name on walls and doors and things of that nature. In general, that's not something that I typically ask for or want to have done. It's something that's usually offered to you or someone wants to do it. The different types of philanthropy that I do, it runs the gamut. I'm always just asking people, how can I help? And I've had to curtail that a little bit because, if you ask that question enough, you're going to get a lot of answers where you're going to have to help people. So, defining some of the spaces that I like to work in and that are easier for me is very helpful. But my network of people that I can call on and the organizations that know me and trust me and understand the kind of work that I do is pretty vast, and that's very helpful.
Yes, I like to say that there's always more money in the Rolodex than in my bank account.
Without a doubt.
It's true for everybody. Bill Gates has Carlos Slim and Warren Buffett's cell phone numbers, right? That's very interesting to me with all the stuff I'm working on now. So when you can't fund something, but perhaps you still like it, how do you approach that? Because it's not really a no, right? It's no, I can't give you money, but I can help you in these ways.
Sometimes it's deliberate.
Yeah.
Sometimes me just writing a check isn't the best thing for the organization.
Agreed.
When I give my money, you get me as well, and that's a really big deal for me. Is I'm not just writing checks to people. So if it's the Laguna Beach Community Health Clinic, where I give $10,000 to $15,000 a year, I'm still very involved with what that clinic does, and it's near and dear to my heart because my nephew used it when he was younger, and then I saw the need in the community. To the work that I do with the State Department and the Global Equality Fund or the diplomatic reception rooms, they get nice donations, but also I sit on both of those committees. So at the end of the day, they get money, but they get me too, and it's good for me because then I can see what's being done and I can understand that my investment in these organizations are really making a difference.
So speaking of which, do I understand correctly that you've recently become the board chair of Atlas Corps?
Yes, I have.
You know I used to work there, right?
Yes, I do. I remember you working there.
It's a great organization, and I want to thank Selma for helping to schedule. She's sitting in the corner of the room now, and if she were to talk, the microphone wouldn't pick it up. But thanks very much for the help. Selma's an Atlas Corps fellow from Turkey, and for the folks at home that may not, I don't think I've talked about Atlas Corps on the other episodes. It's like the Peace Corps, but it goes in the opposite direction. We recruit the best NGO talent in the world, and we place them here in the U.S. And my job there specifically was I talked to nonprofits who had never hosted a fellow before, and explained to them the value of being able to recruit from the entire world, which some people understood right away, and other people it took more convincing. You've been involved for a while. I think possibly longer. You might have been involved before I started working there.
Yes.
She asked me when I worked there, and I don't remember. I'm too old now to remember what year things happened and such. So how long have you been involved with Atlas Corps?
I was just talking to Scott Beal, the founder, about this the other day. I think it was 2008, 2007.
Yeah, that's a long time. Good for you.
Yeah, 10 years.
What is it about Atlas Corps that makes you support them over others?
I see Atlas Corps as being one of the greatest soft power assets that we have right now, especially with the new political environment that we're in. Atlas Corps was designed to bring emerging leaders to the U.S. to work in nonprofit NGOs, and then go back to their countries and in civil society build organizations or go into government or do whatever it is they do with the perspective that they've gained by coming to the United States. And for me, watching how the alumni from Atlas Corps have been able to move and grow is just as powerful as what we're doing for the organizations that they come in to serve.
Yes.
So they make an impact here with the organizations they work at, and then they make an impact when they go back.
Yes. That's interesting. So for you, it's more of a international building of civil societies abroad, training these folks, sending them abroad.
Yes.
That's very interesting for me. I mean, I was always aware of that, and I would even mention it sometimes when I was trying to sell. But for me, my general cause is that I want to support the nonprofit sector in the U.S. I'm all for the nonprofit sector everywhere, but we can only do so much, right? And so I always think about it like this is just a great opportunity for nonprofits here in the U.S. to access talent that they couldn't otherwise. And that's most of it for me. And it just goes to show two people, both very handsome, can support the same organization for different reasons.
Sure.
And in different ways, right? You're probably not going to go work there, right? Or maybe you could. It is fun, but you decided to join the board, and I believe you were. I saw you at the gala last year,
Yes.
Which worked out very well, and we support those things.
Yes.
That's terrific. I hope you'll continue to support Atlas Corps. I've had a number of jobs, and the ones that I've left, most of them I talk about in the past tense, and I usually don't say we. I find, though, that when I talk, even though I left Atlas Corps, I think it's been 5 years, I still say we. When I talk about, I'm not on the board, I don't work there, I have no formal, but I still say we when I talk about it, which I find very interesting.
Well, the Atlas Corps family, again, is very
Yes.
vast, and Selma's a perfect example of that. The energy and the love that they extend to people is just incredible. And the best part of my dealing with Atlas Corps is being around the fellows and seeing such diverse backgrounds coming together and no conflict. And it's like watching a group of children. And these are substantial people in their own right. These are not just people who want to come and get a job in the U.S. These are people who are educated, who have done something in their countries already and have other opportunities, but chose to use Atlas Corps as a way of maybe furthering their career or expanding their horizons.
Have you ever had the opportunity to do an airport pickup for Atlas Corps?
I pick everybody up for Atlas Corps.
Well, it was very interesting experience for me. I would have to.
I see what you're saying. When you go to pick up the fellows.
When they first
gotcha.
arrive in the country at the airport,
Yes.
Someone has to go pick them up, right? And the volunteers or staff members take turns and stuff. And I've gone to the airport, I think 6 or 7 times to pick up various fellows. Which when they first told me I had to do that, I resisted very hard. No one wants to go to the airport to pick up anybody. But I should not have. Those ended up being some of the more interesting experiences of my life, including there was one fellow who I believe we're not supposed to name because he was placed from Syria, and I believe we ended up placing him back somewhere else. We weren't going to make him go back to Syria, but so we picked him up from the airport, and that week was training week, and we were conducting the training that week at Sixth and I Synagogue, which is my synagogue. So not only did I get to meet this young Syrian activist at the airport and be the first American he met, I also got to bring him to synagogue for his first time.
Oh wow!
Where there were, we had to do some counting. There were in that class in the room there were 7 different faiths being trained all together at my personal synagogue.
Yeah.
And that was awesome.
Well, Alice Gore brings people from all backgrounds together, and they put that stuff away, and it's really interesting to watch. So, there are biases that people have accumulated over their lifetime, but Alice Gore breaks down a lot of that really quickly.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's really interesting stuff. Do you remember how you and I met?
We met at the White House, I think.
It was actually the day before at the State Department. You gave a tour.
Oh, that's right. So Jonah Whitcamper asked me to give a tour of the diplomatic reception rooms, which
Yes.
I'm on the committee of the Fine Arts Committee at the State Department, which is in charge of there. And
Are you still on that committee?
I sure am, yeah. And we went up, and you all got a pin,
Yeah,
a State Department pin.
I still have
This
it.
is a long time ago.
Yeah, I saw the largest rug I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's one of the largest. It is.
Is it one of the world's largest
It
rugs?
is one of the. Yeah, it is.
Well, it's really neat up there. It's that I don't have the entire tour, but I'm a big fan. I'm from New England and a big fan of Paul Revere, and also we had some Paul Revere imitation furniture in my house growing up, and that's if I remember correctly, the largest collection of.
It's probably one of the top collections. I wouldn't say it's the largest, but it's one of the most significant collections of American furniture and art that has historical importance. So you have a desk that was Thomas Jefferson's desk. You have the Treaty of Paris desk, where the Treaty of Paris was signed and our nation became a nation. And you have Dolly Mattis's dining room table and chairs. So there's all kinds of objects of that nature that are there. But those rooms are used for our country's diplomacy. That's where the President and the Secretary of State do their meetings.
And why is it important to have such nice stuff in there to have these meetings?
Well, I think it's a little bit like the philosophy of bringing people on the yacht. You bring people in who have different backgrounds, and you disarm them a little bit. Those rooms were not always like that. Clem Conger, who was the curator in the beginning, built those rooms out in the 60s because the State Department, if you've ever been in the building, it's not a pretty building. But those rooms
Other than the parts of the 7th floor. No,
it's
not
true.
Not
7th and 8th
attractive.
floor, yeah. Those rooms are some of the most elegant, wonderful rooms that you'll ever go into.
For sure.
And it's all done with private money. And so when Secretary Clinton became Secretary of State, they were talking about how to keep these treasures, and I helped, and among others, raise an endowment of $20 million to keep them kept up. And so,
Great.
So that's, it's a great part of our country's history that not a lot of people get to see.
Yes, I was very fortunate to go on that. It was a very interesting group that we got to tour around. Just to give some acknowledgments, and that's also where I met Mary Galletti on that same tour for the very first time. She is now one of the funders of the Unfunded List, and I assume it's because of the great experience that you created on that tour that allowed us to connect in a way that eventually led to that grant. So a soft thank you to you there.
Well, I love hearing that's how you and Mary as you go through your life and you introduce people. And those people are doing really good work and doing great things. It's really wonderful to see how they connected, and sometimes just the act of putting them in the same room together can make things happen. So it's wonderful.
And also that day was the day that Liesl Pritzker and Ian Simmons met.
That's right.
And they are now married.
That's true. And there's another.
Again, credit must all go to you for that.
Yeah. Well, I will take credit. And there's a couple that they just celebrated their 4th anniversary that met on the boat for an Atlas Corps event.
Yes.
And they got married. So
yes, I'm
2 for 2.
I was helping organize that one. And I added Richard. Richard was a friend of mine, Research Generation, that suggested to put him on the list. And I was Depanata's, what was the joke we said? Their host, what do they call your host parent, host family? Local ambassador. I was Depanata's local ambassador.
Well, they were just here, and watching both of them together is wonderful.
Yeah, they are wonderful. I actually am now sharing an office with Depanata at the WeWork White House location.
Okay.
which you should come by sometime. It's a great opportunity to look down on the president. Visit. It's a really cool space.
I didn't know you were a comedian too.
Well, sometimes, as long as they're laughing, right?
Yeah.
The reason we were on that tour is because the following day was it was not called Nexus at that time. It was the White House Summit on Next Generation Philanthropy, or
That's right.
something like that. Are you do you continue to be involved in those sorts of philanthropy convenings, and other than bringing them onto the yacht and stuff, are you going to larger philanthropy summits and networks and stuff?
Yeah, the Clinton Global Initiative was something that I was really involved with in the very beginning and maintained, that relationship. My relationship with the Clintons has been wide and vast over the many years. CGI was a big part of that, and I did a lot of convenings and meetings, larger meetings at the White House and during the Obama administration. And, you go to conventions. I go to TED.
Mm-hmm.
I love TED. That's fun. That's part of what you do.
Mm-hmm. You need to be, even in today's world where we can connect with anybody on the planet over the computer, I do find even perhaps more important now to be able to make in-person connections and stuff. It's just it's invaluable. Yeah. Particularly if you need to ask for help, you can only make such a compelling ask over email.
Yeah, very true.
There is a top end to how compelling an email can be, and an even lower end for text messages. If you are making your ask over text messages at home, that is probably a bad idea. I mean, learn your donor, learn how they communicate and everything, yes. but probably not a good idea.
Written requests of any kind of support are usually the worst kind.
Well, it's not, but also sometimes necessary. So you just mentioned my number one hero. And she's not, the Unfunded List and Invitation Only are nonpartisan, but she's not currently running for anything. So I can say that Hillary Clinton is probably my biggest role model. Hillary Clinton has been on this yacht, right?
Yes.
So that I do like that. Talk to me a little bit about so you know her much better than I do. My mother went to college with her.
Oh.
They're both very busy women in different fields now,
Sure.
So they actually see each other at reunions, and that's pretty much it. But talk to me about how you work with Hillary Clinton.
You have me wondering if I've ever met your mother now.
She's lovely.
How did I meet Hillary? I think my previous partner had started a firm that raised money for nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
And very early on, we had some clients that did work with the White House. So one of them was involved in clearing landmines. There was the African Medical Society and Helen Keller Institute. And so there were some connections to the White House through the firm. And it was in an event. I don't remember the specific first time I met Bill or Hillary, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to remember that right now. It's been a long time. But I remember getting to know her much better when she was just before I got to know her during the process of raising money for the Clinton Library. So let me back up. President Clinton hired my firm to raise money for his Presidential Center and Library in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And Secretary Clinton was not a senator at that time. So there were a lot of discussions. This is before the
She would have been planning or running, though, right?
I don't think
I can't remember.
I don't know when she started planning.
I can't remember when she got
I can't
elected
speak to
either.
that. But they were in a similar place where the Obamas are right now.
Sure.
Which was, okay, we're out of office. We got to do this library. What are we going to do next? And there was a lot of conversation about what the president was going to do. And you have to remember, he was the president. The focus was on him.
Yes.
Hillary was the past first lady, and talking about her running for Senate or anything really wasn't the big deal. The big deal was, what was Bill Clinton going to do? And he was he was the focus of the nation at that point.
Yes.
As we went through the process of starting to raise money and work on the library, I got to know her better, and then she was elected to the Senate, and I would come on occasion to D.C. and see her to talk about certain situations or see them at events.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, when she started running for the Senate, there were, of course, as you, I really admire her, so I was trying to do what I could to help her in the ways that I could, as well in her Senate thing. But I typically stay away from politics. I don't do a lot of political
I mean,
stuff.
she's a politician, but there's a lot more to her. She supports things that are apolitical that everybody would support.
She and her husband are two of the greatest humanitarians that ever have been.
Agreed. So now that CGI has closed its doors, do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Do you think there will be something to take its place?
I think a lot of people will try to duplicate some of the things. I think there's an opportunity for the Obama Foundation to pick up some of that mantle. Whether or not they decide that's what they want to do, I'm not sure. I think, again, they're probably still at that phase of what the heck are we going to do? And I still wouldn't count the Clintons out. I think there's still life left in them, and I think there's still time for them to regroup and in a thoughtful way try to reconstitute some of their philanthropy in a way. Their philanthropy hasn't gone away, by the way. The Clinton Foundation still exists. It still does
and they
wonderful.
Can still raise money, I assume.
Yeah, then they do wonderful work around the world. They're focusing more on the United States right now. I think there's a willingness to do more. And I think there's some really good people thinking about that.
So I do remember when I first met President Clinton. I was at a Wellesley reunion with my father, and I can tell you that the most useless thing at a Wellesley reunion is a father and son. And so we were predictably standing I was very young, but I do remember this, mostly because we've retold the story a lot. But we were standing in the bar area, and my father was having a drink with two other guys. And he had he's a professor. He was a professor at Colby College, and he was talking about his research. He had just gotten tenure, and I think he's talking to these two guys. I think he realizes maybe he's talking too much about himself. So he turns to one and he says, and Calvin, what do you do? And Calvin says, I'm the halfback for the Dallas Cowboys. Because so Janet Hill was in the same class.
Okay.
Married to Calvin Hill, was an all-star halfback, and his son Grant Hill, an NBA all-star. And so my dad, who has a very dry sense of humor, goes, "Oh, that's very interesting," and just turns to the other guy and says, "And Bill, what do you do?" And he says, "I'm the governor of Arkansas."
Yeah. Well, that was the good old days. That was the good old days.
It was a lot of fun. I'm sure they were really interested to hear about. I mean, they were very patiently listening to my dad's research about. I think at the time he was writing his book about Noah Webster, which is somewhat interesting, right? And if you ever want to read a biography of Noah Webster, there's a great one out there written by my father.
Great.
And if you're struggling to go to sleep at night, that's what I would recommend reading that. He has other books that are more interesting. What do you think about? We'll move on from politics in a moment, but just one more question. What do you think about our current president?
Well, I've met Donald Trump. I wouldn't say I know him, but I've met him many times over the years, and especially when Secretary Clinton was running for senator. He was very
he
supportive.
made gifts.
He did fundraisers in his apartment.
Really?
I remember one specific fundraiser where we were in his apartment in Trump Tower, and it was the Indian Americans. There was probably, 100, 150 really excited people to see Donald and the candidate at the time.
Yeah.
And then I remember going down Trump Tower to different people's apartments to say hello with Donald and Hillary and raising money.
Like ringing doorbells?
I think they were they knew
they knew you were on their way.
I think it was prearranged. And I remember that he didn't like to shake hands and kept Purell in his pocket.
Really?
He didn't want to touch people. That's what I remember.
Fascinating. Just to transition out of politics, for the nonprofits out there, which is a lot of the people who listen, who their missions and their status require them to be non-political. However, there's a lot going on that might be affecting the work that they're doing. How would you suggest to groups out there, like Atlas Corps, for instance, how do they approach the political climate of today?
Well, I mean, Atlas Corps has certainly a unique set of circumstances that are very much affected by politics.
Yes.
So nonprofits can advocate for themselves. That's not illegal. But when they start reaching into the political arena, then there are other mechanisms that people can use to do that. 501c3 is a very specific designation for a nonprofit, and I know that the Trump administration has been trying to move that needle a little bit so that there can be more political activism within nonprofits, which I'm totally against, by the way. But I think if an organization wants to push back to help itself, that's one thing. If they're trying to, leaders of a nonprofit have political ideas and want to, fight the good fight because it's something that they morally somehow feel isn't right, I think they should stay out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think unless it has a direct effect on the nonprofit should stay out of politics.
So, but it often can. Just to give a quick sample. So I founded a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
I got my 501c3 letter last month.
Yes.
And we're thinking about how are we going to raise money? How are we going to do all of these things? And how vocal am I going to be? How much am I going to advocate for certain things? Our general mission is to demystify philanthropy and help start-up nonprofits with good ideas improve their grant proposals. And so, for instance, a lot of them are applying for grants from the NEA or the NIH or NIMH. And so when the administration talks about cutting those things, I don't see how it would be responsible for me to not say anything about that. Certainly, I have to deal with it. We review grant proposals, and many of them are being written there, and I'm trying to give them advice for how to get funded by these programs.
Sure.
And so when you're in an instance like that, and I think it's entirely possible that conservatives and Trump supporters might support the work that I'm doing, right? So how can you? Because I think you have a political mindset, and have even fundraised for candidates. But I also think that you're still capable of having relationships and fundraising, and correct me if I'm wrong, with people with different mindsets. What's the secret to being able to do it? Because I often turn off people of different political persuasions.
So there's a you as an individual can advocate for anything you want. That's part of the great thing of being in the United States of America.
I agree.
But if you start to use the resources of a nonprofit, or when you are acting as a leader of a nonprofit, then you have a different set of standards that you have to abide by. So you, Dave Moss, can turn off as many people as you want to while you're by yourself. But you have to put on your nonprofit hat every once in a while and say, okay, maybe I got to rein some of that stuff in because it's better for the nonprofit. Although part of your personality is part of why people are supporting your nonprofit. So it can be a little convoluted. I love the way you operate in the world, and I would not change you in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. For everybody who says that, there is somebody who says, Dave, you need to change in this specific way. And I'll let you guess who I listen to more.
I can imagine.
So a long time ago, I worked for a firm that did donor advising. One of the people we advised was Jonathan Lewis, Peter Lewis's son. He made some large gifts to human rights campaigns and other. This was 2006 or so, and his main issue was gay marriage, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to go work there. You've worked on LGBT issues. I don't believe it's something I've covered on the podcast so far. It's been an exciting, particularly the last 10, 12 years, pretty exciting field to work on with some big advancements. Talk to me a little bit about what you've done in that field and what you're currently working on.
Well, I didn't have much of a choice because as I grew up, I was always who I am. I never was someone who hid that. And so I had a stepfather who was very homophobic. And that caused me a lot of trouble. But that only made me more determined. And then when I was in high school, that was at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic and the big scare. And I had a cousin who became very ill very quickly in San Diego. They didn't know what it was, but the doctors and the nurses wouldn't even go in his room. So his sister and I were the only two that would go into the room and help him. And that really solidified my thoughts in terms of, number one, there was a lot of fear there, right? And so I was dealing with that and my friends, and on a national scale level, it was pretty high. And I remember the conversations about New York and San Francisco and not wanting to even talk to anybody who'd come from New York or San Francisco. This was sort of the epicenters of this, whatever was happening. So it also made me very angry.
Yeah.
And shortly thereafter, I graduated from high school. And right after I graduated high school, I went to New York City. And, I got involved on a personal level and on some organized levels in terms of gay rights movements, right? So I would go to marches. I would make friends and family come to the gay parade when it was very difficult for them to be seen at the parade. So I had some wonderful next door neighbors, the Wassermans, who are just wonderful people. But, they would come to the parade with us. And I knew that on some level for them was a little uncomfortable, but after a while they became some of the biggest advocates. So, that history of not wanting to repress who I am and the ability, I've got a tremendous amount of white privilege in my life too. So
same.
Yeah. So, I was never afraid in a way that maybe some of our other brothers and sisters are. But I also, because of my upbringing and being able to go into a room, was very confident that I could get in any situation and make it work for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
the LGBT stuff started very young. I started working with the gay men's health crisis when I was very young, when it first started. Got involved with fundraising there. And then we did a concert at Carnegie Hall with Pavarotti and Leonard Bernstein and all
nice.
These great things. That was just like this, for me, was just this wonderful acknowledgement that there were people other than gay people who were really interested in this. And that was, it really fueled the fire of all the gay causes and LGBT causes that I work on now.
Absolutely. So I am heterosexual, but I absolutely love Pride. I think that's one of my favorite events. It's very meaningful for me because so I grew up in Maine, where there is one way to be a heterosexual man, and it's not I would view it as sort of toxic masculinity, and it was never really, even though I am heterosexual, interested in women, not really in the same way that that it was expected of young men. There, it's very this is where lumberjacks come from, right? We literally have a lumberjack on our state flag.
There's a lot of gay lumberjacks out there.
Yeah, but so in reality, lumberjacks are very diverse people. But I'm talking about the perception of what they should be, right? From people who are not lumberjacks. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things, for me about Pride is, you also grow up in Maine with hearing a lot of stereotypes about how gay people are. Basically, there's only one type of gay person as well. And you go to Pride and you find out that no, there's. It seems to be all about the fact that there's lots of different ways to be both homosexual and heterosexual. It's just very meaningful for me to see everybody out there. We just had it here. Did you attend the parade here in DC?
I did, and I attended the march the next day.
Mm-hmm. And I've been enjoying Pride-liking comments on Facebook.
Yeah? Yeah. Well, there was a day that celebrating these things was not as joyous as it is today. It was a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. So it is. For me, it is joyous. Watching the next generation of youth come up and celebrating, and some of them not even understanding or even remembering or having the institutional knowledge of what happened before them. But it gives me a great sense of satisfaction knowing that they don't have to worry about that.
That must be nice. And I've heard that from others. People that they can just go to Pride and have it be an entirely positive experience for them, and that even their families are supportive of them going there. I mean, and in a very short amount of time. I mean, the needle can move very fast
in a generation
on issues, and that's that stuff's great. And I think one area where I'd like to see the needle move very fast is something that I know you care about. Is criminal justice reform. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm aware that you work on that, but I really have no idea what you do on that front. Mm-hmm. So what do you? I mean, that's something that's especially this weekend. I think it's worthwhile to say his name. Philando Castile, his murderer, was set free this week. I mean, and that's pretty hard for people to stomach. I can see how they might think that we don't have rule of law in this country as a result of that. And I'm starting to suspect that may be true. So what are you doing to bring that back, to make sure that murderers go to jail?
Well, so let me back up for a second. I was always sort of seen as the LGBT activist guy, right? And that kind of always bothered me because I'm not just LGBT, I'm other things too, right? But I got an invitation from the White House to go to an event. There was a criminal justice reform event. I thought, well, that's interesting. I don't know why. I just assumed that a person that I knew in the White House had sent that invitation. And I called her and I said, hi, great. Thanks for inviting me to this thing. What is it? She said, I did invite you, but if you're in town, I'll set up a private briefing for you. So I met with some senior leadership at the White House, and they briefed me about what was going on in mass incarceration and criminal justice reform. And this was after a sort of a spate of shootings, and Black Lives Matter was very active in the public sort of domain at that point. I sat there listening to the briefing and hearing about the work that the folks at the White House were doing and seeing the passion. And I really, I went into the, what can I do to help mode. And I realized I didn't want to get stuck down working on, individual organizations, but I wanted to, there was a much larger conversation that needed to be had in our country. And there's a much larger problem than just each of these individual things that people are working on. So reentry, recidivism, jobs, whatever those things are. I didn't want to get involved in that stuff. I wanted to raise the sort of conversation to how can I help on a more national scale. And so I started doing some convenings. I did a convening at George Washington University with the dean of the medical school there and a group of philanthropists and activists. And then I took them over to the White House, and we had a briefing there and did some meetings. And I went to a lot of briefings and meetings at the White House, and nothing happened, right? And so as I progressed through this sort of, point of worrying about my friends who were friends of color, literally worried that at night when they were driving home in Texas, that, maybe I was overreacting a little bit, but there were times that I was sitting back and thinking, all this work we did on LGBT and how organized the LGBT movement was, how can we do that with mass incarceration? I said, the LGBT people are probably already dealing with mass incarceration and inclined to help. So I started calling my friends and I said, how about we move the LGBT movement infrastructure towards mass incarceration and criminal justice reform? Help them. We may not always agree with them. There may be things that we're not really geared or wired to work with, but we have a communications arm. It's called GLAD. We have relationships with state legislatures. And this all happened after the Trump administration started to come into power, because I realized nothing's going to happen with the Jeff Sessions in the Attorney
Probably
General.
not.
So it's state-based work that we have to do. I stayed in touch with the president's team and have worked with them. And they've been very helpful about helping me get the right people to convene. And so I got nothing but positive responses from both sides. I've been doing
That's great.
A lot of the leaders in both movements have really agreed that they would like to come together somehow and work together to build a national movement in mass incarceration.
That could be very powerful.
I sure hope so. I hope so.
It reminds me a little bit, something that I like to think about a lot. So I'm Jewish
And heterosexual.
Yes, there's many of us. Like you said, the LGBT community, because they've had to advocate so fiercely for themselves, have an infrastructure now. Like you mentioned, there's different communications arms and other things. And I believe even do I remember correctly? You were involved in the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Networking business leaders and things of that sort. The Jewish community is very well organized and almost disproportionately powerful. It's something we get criticism for, and they famously have worked with the civil rights movement in the '60s, mostly as donors and activists, because they understood and they had the infrastructure, and that became very powerful partnerships. So that's quite meaningful for me.
No, I was on the board of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and I think for me, those years on that board really showed me how you build a movement, and you really, in a very thoughtful way, can help change the dialogue in a nation.
Absolutely. Civil society, right? That's terrific. You mentioned earlier on grew up, you said, in a Navy family.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was a dentist on a battleship.
Oh,
in
wow.
Guantanamo Bay.
Your teeth are lovely.
They could be a little bit better, but so I know that you do some work with veterans.
Yes.
Does that come from being raised in a military family, or?
Yeah, it started there, and then it started with a lot of my friends are in the military.
Mm.
I have a home in California that's close to a Marine Corps base, and I have a lot of friends who are the Marines. And when they started going to Iraq, in the first Iraq War, it was very difficult for me, very difficult for them.
Yes.
And then they started coming back.
Mm.
And the PTSD that I was seeing in my friends was really bad. And it made me really want to do more.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the same way that I approach everything else, I'm like, okay, I don't want to get down in the weeds. How am I going to elevate this to make sure that we maximize what we can do here? And so in 2006, I think it was 2006, I was at an event for Tammy Duckworth. She was running at that time, the first time she ran. And we were at Fred Hochberg's apartment, who used to be the head of the Ex-Im Bank here in the United States. And then at the time he wasn't, but anyway. And Hillary was there.
Oh, lovely.
And Dennis Chang, who had just started working with the Hillary organization, who became her finance chair for her presidential campaign, was there. And there was this guy in there that was clearly military to me. I could spot them a mile away. And I was like, what is he doing here? And now Tammy is obviously a veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And I struck up a conversation with him, and we went out afterwards, and he started talking about his need to want to help get veterans elected. The light bulb went off, and he started an organization called Vote Vets.
I've heard of that.
And asked me to be on his advisory board, and I said yes. And, it went from this little organization to now they're really making a very good impact on a lot of congressional, Senate, and otherwise campaigns. And I think one of our proudest moments was that Donald Trump banned us on Twitter 2 days ago. So
this is an organization that represents veterans, and
yes.
And the president banned it on Twitter.
Yes, he has stifled
Just
500,000
want to make sure
veterans.
we were clear
Yeah.
that that's what happened.
Free speech is not something that should be messed with lightly.
I think there's actually probably an argument to be made that he can't do that.
He's not going to listen.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to go over there and make that argument myself, but hopefully someone does. That's good. Keep up the good work. I think there were some. So I graduated high school in the year 2000 from a high school that had a long tradition of sending our graduates to work in the military. There in Maine, there's what is it called? Bath. There's a naval ship, a large shipyard there that builds boats and several bases. And at the time, there was even Loring Air Force Base.
Right.
We had a lot of nukes pointed at Moscow.
Right.
There. And these were great jobs. And in 2000, we hadn't been in a war in a very long time, and it looked like possibly we weren't ever going. I remember thinking that America is done going to war.
Right.
And the mills were all closing down, so those jobs were gone. So a lot of boys, I think it was over half of the guys in my class joined the military, and a lot of the women as well. And you're right. Some of them came back missing limbs and stuff. In some ways, they are the lucky ones. It's the ones that came back with the significant PTSD and other emotional issues. And and I think there were some reasons to get engaged in those conflicts. But it is certainly true that some things went wrong. And even more true that the perspective of people who have been there is going to be crucial to have in our government. So that's very important work. Hopefully other influential people block you on Twitter as well as you keep going forward, and that you have other successes with it as well. Wayne has handed me something that I believe I understand. I'm to ask you about the floating clinic in Africa.
Oh, Lake Tanganyika Floating Health Clinic.
Yeah, tell me about
Amy
that.
Amy Lehman is a sheer force of willpower that I have very rarely encountered.
Yeah.
I first met her when I was at an event. A friend of mine was a photographer, an artist and a photographer, and he had gone on an excursion to Lake Tanganyika with Amy and was photographing. Apparently, their boat sank, and it was all kinds of things that happened. And I'm hearing this story, and at the end of it was, and can she meet President Clinton? And I was like, sure she probably could. But we were doing an event at MoMA. Every year we used to, at the Clean Global Initiative, the board of MoMA would let us use MoMA for a dinner. And
That's nice.
all the attendees from CGI would come in, and we would go to MoMA and just wander around sipping cocktails. And somehow I got Amy access to come in, and we got to know each other. And I sat down and learned about the work that she was doing there and how she basically has a clinic on a boat and goes around and reaches your rural areas that have no health services whatsoever. And she's helping people, and she's a fierce advocate for it, and has every year increased her support and is doing really, really wonderful things in the world.
So I understand. So it's on what body of water does it travel?
Lake
on?
Tanganyika, which is something like the second largest body of fresh water in the world. It's
Where in Africa?
right in the middle.
Sorry, I don't know. I don't know where it is either.
It borders on several different countries, and
I think I can picture it on the map.
You can.
You mean like bullseye in the middle,
if you just
right?
look, it's not hard to miss.
Yeah. Well, it's a big lake. Yeah. I see it from space and everything. And there's just a full clinic on this boat.
Yeah, I think they put as many services as they can on it. Because I have a boat.
There's not a clinic on this boat.
We have a really good first aid kit.
Well, I'll be careful.
I have EpiKits. But I introduced her to our naval architect, and we talked about trying to raise money to build a bigger boat and things of that nature. At the end of the day, as she grows and the organization is growing, she really is somebody who, in a very real way, knows that area of the world really well and what the people need.
That's great. Is there an organization behind it, or
the Lake Tanganyika Floating Health Clinic?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I know. I've never heard of that. That's really interesting.
Well, you should meet Amy.
I'd love to.
I would admonish you to interview her as well, because she's really dynamic. I think you'll find her very interesting for your interviews.
Terrific. So I have a few more questions to get here. Which historical figure do you admire most? Feel free to go all the way. Feel free to go to ancient Greece or wherever you'd like.
Wow, that's a hard one because there's so many. I love history too.
You can take your time. I can.
Okay, let me think about that for a second. Just one.
Feel free to go for more. It's your interview. You can answer how you'd like.
It depends on what genre you're talking about, right?
I realize it's a broad question.
Yeah, no. I mean, you think about it. You think of, is it an LGBT? Is it technology? Is it, the founding of a country? Is it, Europe? So, I always admired Winston Churchill because I always thought that he was somebody who, not because of what he did in World War II, which was great, but he was somebody who nobody believed in. And he kept getting knocked down and he kept coming back. And he believed in himself and he believed in what he was doing so much that he saved Europe. And so that was one person that I thought was really interesting.
Certainly somebody. That's certainly somebody to admire. Yes.
Yeah.
An equally broad question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite piece of literature? A poem, novel?
I love poetry by Rupert Brooks.
I don't think I know.
He was in the World War and had a very difficult life. So his poetry is really good. And someone who works for me here is a poet, and she teaches poetry and is published. And so I love poetry, so I like that.
You still read poetry?
Mm.
Do you write any?
I'm not really good at writing poetry now.
I think one of the things about poetry is that even the people, the worst poet in the world should be writing poetry. You don't have to read your poems to other people, but
Right.
I mean, I write poems myself, mostly haikus because I like the structure to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something I share with other people. It's just that to keep my brain sharp,
Sure.
I guess. And generally, I think everybody should find some art that they do.
Of course.
And again, you don't have, there's fine art, right? And we can have an appreciation for that. We can go to museums and look at it. But I think something that gets overlooked a lot is that it doesn't all have to be good, right? In fact, most art's terrible.
Sure.
Even a lot of fine art is terrible.
It's all perspective.
If someone likes any piece of art, right? Even my terrible art I make, I'm sure my mother likes it.
Yes, I'm sure she does. Or she'll tell you she does.
Oh, and it's meaningful to her. She
Yeah, of course,
understands
that's
where
right, exactly.
my son
He made this to me. Of course.
wrote this
We
terrible
all have
poem.
those. I actually have my previous partner and I. He had 2 daughters when we met, and I actually have framed a watercolor that one of the girls had made. Which
Sure.
most people look at it like, "What the heck is that?" And I'm like, "I think it's gorgeous." So yes.
I also have a framed picture that my grandmother, who has passed, that she painted. She used to paint when she was young. And so it's a girl on a swing, but she painted the rope of the swing too long, so she's on the back swing, and you can tell clearly that she's just going to smash into the ground.
Oh no! And that gave you amusement.
I mean, it's my grandmother. I mean, nobody would be interested in this because it looks like this girl's about to really seriously hurt herself.
I think your grandmother did that on purpose.
Maybe perhaps she did. I think actually my cousin Annie has that painting now. But it's meaningful, and I'm sure it was a good exercise for her. If I remember correctly, you guys were involved in the design of this wonderful yacht that we're on.
Yeah, my partner John Evans is very, very involved in this yacht. He hired a naval architect and designed it from the bottom up, and then it just went through a refit of 2 years where they cut the back off and we added 9 feet and redid the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I remember before that, one of my only criticism was that it should be 9 feet longer. This yacht is 9 feet too short.
Yes, that's what Well,
So I'm glad to hear that. Now it's perfect.
Yes, it's just right.
It is great. How much of the year do you spend on the yacht versus on land?
Well, the boat, I call it the boat, sits outside of our house in Fort Lauderdale in the winter, and then it sits about a block away from our house in Sag Harbor in Long Island, New York. We use it 4 to 5 times a week. There's a chef here, so we don't go out to restaurants much. We eat on the boat, so we take the boat out for dinner a lot. So it's just it's part of our lifestyle, but it's also a wonderful way for us to relax and get away from it all.
And a great fundraising vehicle, literally.
Yeah, no, I mean, you get them on the boat, give them a martini, and say you can't get off until you write a check, otherwise you have to swim. They're not going to want to swim, especially after a martini. And probably not in the Potomac either. Not in the Potomac, no.
Just a few more questions.
Sure.
What's the most exciting thing going on in philanthropy right now?
In the world of Atlas Corps, there's a lot of consolidation that's probably going to happen soon.
How do you mean consolidation?
Well, I think there's a lot of talk about organizations merging. So that's interesting to me. And so I've been, thinking a lot about mergers lately and how does an organization keep its assets when it's moving into something else.
Very challenging.
There's a lot of organizations starting out of the need for people to understand how philanthropy works, and I see philanthropy in a little bit different way because I remember it before computers. So for me, it's a very basic relationship building type of philosophy. But there's a lot of technology that's coming in, and I'm going to make this easier for you. I don't know if that's exciting or disturbing, but
a little of both.
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think technology is helpful in some ways.
One of the things I worry about with the things like crowd raising and some of the peer-to-peer fundraising we can do online, and some of the newer tech things in philanthropy. I personally worry about cannibalization. You can. So if somebody starts a fundraiser on Facebook, right, and they ask you for $15, you were planning to give $100, but you give the $15 because it was easier, and then you end up not making that gift down the road.
Well, the other thing about that is that the people who are giving the money, so when we did the Clinton Library, the first thing they did was a mailer where they asked for donations. They raised a lot of money.
Yeah, you still can from mailers.
Right, and
still
so
works.
Direct mail is a really great way to get people initially started, and then you can use that as a way to sort of build your base. And I see the Facebook thing being something like that. So if I was going to give 100 and I only give 15, that's in my mind. I still have $85 to give to somewhere else then. But at the same time, I wonder if people are really building the relationship with the organization in the way that they would otherwise do.
That's it, because that's very important. People aren't going to keep giving unless
you get that one time $15 is. Well, I've already done that. You go to the next one.
What is the biggest problem that you think today's philanthropists could recently solve?
HIV.
Yeah?
that could be solved tomorrow.
Yeah, how would we do that?
If you got everybody on antiretrovirals, you would have herd immunity and nobody would contract HIV anymore.
So, everybody would need to take the...
Anybody who is HIV positive, if they were on the antiretrovirals, and those who are possibly, going to be infected were on prophylaxis, like Truvada or something like that, you could be done with HIV very quickly.
What is preventing that from happening?
Money.
How much money would you need to...
Billions. I mean, the HIV therapies are very expensive. Secretary Clinton did a report on it 5 or 6 years ago where they talked about this. And in the beginning, I'm on the board of advisors for Dr. Gallup, who discovered the HIV virus and is working on a vaccine for HIV. And a vaccine, even if it works, is still going to be years out. So you've got to do something in the meantime. But they have drugs now that can take the virus and suppress it in a person's body so they can't give it to somebody else. And if you were able to do that with everybody who had HIV, nobody else would have contracted it. Within a generation, it would be gone. So there's that, theoretical way to do it, and then there's the, get the vaccine and do it that way too. But that's still not here yet.
Well, that's very promising. And you think it will be? You think we're going to do that?
I think eventually we'll get to there. I think we will.
I certainly hope so, and that we solve a lot of other problems.
Our science is improving in ways. I mean, I'm not a scientist and not the smartest guy in the room, but
perhaps in this room.
Well, maybe not.
Selma's in this room. Other than Selma.
Selma's the smartest guy in the room. No, I love Selma. But when I go to these advisory board meetings for Dr. Gell and the scientists are talking, I find myself saying, "Okay, could you explain this in human terms?" And I realize that they are really making, on a very molecular level, they're making changes to us.
Very, very exciting. Thanks, this was great. Thanks for inviting me onto the Waterford. Always a pleasure to be here.
Sure.
And thanks for the conversation.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Open Door Philanthropy featuring Steve Wozencraft. As always, if you're willing to provide helpful and candid feedback on unfunded grant proposals, please sign up at unfundedlist.com.